The questioning of a jogger this week on VFW Parkway has sparked outrage by local officials and Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley against federal immigration enforcement by ICE. Among those denouncing the stop before the involvement of ICE was even confirmed is the District City Councilor for West Roxbury and Jamaica Plain. We'd like to welcome Matt O'Malley. Thank you very much for being with us, Councilor.
Always great to be with you, Chris.
Like the man who was stopped, you've done some jogging and you have talked to the jogger, Benna Prela. What was your impressions from him?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's safe to say I've jogged that stretch of the Parkway hundreds, if not thousands of times through the years. It's a well-worn track for many runners. I have never been stopped while jogging there, and I think viewers can deduce the reason why. So it was just abhorrent to me that an individual, a neighbor, a Roslindale resident, was going out for a jog on a beautiful fall day and was stopped and questioned for seemingly no other reason, at least initially, that we knew of, that other than the fact that he's a black man. It is wrong. It was racial. It is and was racial profiling. And we need to do everything we can to make sure that policies change so it doesn't happen again here or anywhere else.
The reports from ICE were that they thought he might have been some person they were supposed to be looking for because of violations of immigration and maybe because of criminal activity before that as well. On the other hand, I've looked at images of these two people. I'm not convinced that they're dead ringers. I don't know. What was your impression?
I don't think there was any resemblance, other, again, the fact that they are both black men. But there's no, there are several problems here. First being ICE initially refused to issue a comment when contacted. So needless to say that, enabled the rumor mill to run into overtime, and there was a lot of concern as to who these individuals were. Once it was indeed confirmed, it was around 1 o'clock yesterday, almost a full 24 hours after the incident occurred, that ICE did claim responsibility for it. There are protocols and policies in place that they simply did not adhere to in terms of stopping an individual. As mentioned, I've talked to the victim several times, and the tone was certainly very hostile initially towards him. There were other rules that weren't adhered to when he was stopped. He was obviously very, very scared, as any of us would be, but particularly in this time in America, it was a very harrowing experience for him. It's no excuse if ICE is now saying they were looking for an individual in the neighborhood. It's no excuse for the way that this man was treated. And again, at an absolute minimum, he is owed an apology from the officers, and more than that, it is incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we put policies and procedures again so it doesn't happen. This man was stopped simply because of what he looks like, and was treated poorly as a result, and that's wrong. We have to call it out and we have to fix it.
I wonder if you could sort of recreate the encounter a bit. I don't know about you. I've been stopped by police in Boston a number of occasions, usually by one officer. Sometimes it was good, sometimes it was not so good. But what was going on here? Because I'm talking about two SUVs almost converging.
Yeah, it may have even been 3 SUVs in total. I'm not entirely sure, but it was multiple cars, different angles, sort of the way the folks came out. And as viewers know, these were not Boston police officers. These were now we've confirmed federal agents with Immigrants and Custom Enforcement. And they just seemingly came out of nowhere to this guy who, again, was jogging down the street in the middle of an afternoon on a fall day. It was unclear in terms of how forthright they were with the reason for the stop. And it was very, very scary. The victim was brave, and I think it was ultimately being a very smart move, but could have been risky in the time, to take his cell phone out and begin recording the individuals. It is my understanding that their demeanor changed once they were on film. But even that could have been a risky proposition. Reaching for a phone, it could have gone in a very different direction. So I really admire his bravery for doing that, and it's important for doing that because seeing the images, it again shows what an unfortunate incident it was, what a dangerous incident it was, and it was, as I said, racial profiling, and it has to stop.
ICE defended the behavior of his people there. They said that, look, they have the right to stop people and ask questions. They have the right to ask for identification. So what does that mean for the ordinary person? Does that mean that we should carry IDs, something like an internal passport?
No, it's outrageous. It is so offensive. Not only, I mean, it's so offensive that it happened in the first place, and the reaction from ICE in the 48 hours since it's happened is even more abhorrent. Um, Chris, if you and I were stopped mistakenly, we would have been apologized. There would have been an apology coming from ICE to us. We know that. This individual hasn't received an apology. It was very difficult to even get basic information, but for the leadership of our federal partners like Congressman Stephen Lynch and Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, it was difficult for me even to find out some basic information for what had happened. The fact that ICE is now doubling down on what they did without recognizing the fact that it was a mistake. It was a very, very bad mistake. And again, at a minimum, they owe this man an apology. And furthermore, they need to be crystal clear with a full transparent accounting for why it happened, how it happened, and policies and procedures in place need to be adhered to so that it doesn't happen again.
By the way, I say you plan to go for a jog with Mr. Aprila. What do you hope to accomplish by that?
Well, as I said, I've been a runner in these neighborhoods for most of my life. Particularly in the pandemic, it's been a great source of both exercise and sort of a good, it's always a good mental health break to go for a jog. So I think this is why this hit particularly home to many of us, particularly those who live in the Parkway, that this man was just going out for a jog. So I look forward, I won't purport to say we've got to know each other well, but we've certainly spent a lot of time in communication over the last couple of days, and I'm looking forward to getting to know him better and having a new running partner. I just warned him that I'm slightly overweight 41-year-old, so I hope he can adapt to a slower pace, but he's agreed to do that.
I want to ask you about a whole other category of stops by law enforcement, and people in the council have been working on this for some time. You're going to have some more work looking at the data on stops by the Boston Police. We all know there are racial disparities, whether they're warranted or not is another question, but what do you hope to get from that?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. Several months ago, Councilor Andrea Campbell and I put forth a hearing order to really drill down deeply into some of the data that's been collected as it relates to field interrogation stops, more commonly known, sometimes known as stop and frisk, or the FIOs that have occurred through the BPD. And we're just looking to get clarity on what constitutes a stop, what are the safety protocols that we currently have in place to make sure that racial bias is not the factor in what determines one. And really, the ultimate purpose is to make sure what happened in West Roxbury at the federal level with federal officers doesn't happen at our local level. So I've been gratified that so many police officers with whom I've spoken are excited for this opportunity to learn more, help both educate the public as well as hear some good feedback and perhaps look at some best practices from other municipalities around the country to see how we can do our best to minimize and ultimately eliminating racial profiling, particularly in public safety.
I know things have not totally crystallized yet, but the mayor has a task force on police accountability reform. There were some preliminary recommendations, and they've done some more work since then. Do you have any reactions at this stage to the direction in which they're going?
Yeah, I think it's been very heartening to me to see some of the early recommendations. They're very supportive of looking at ways that we can adopt policies, looking at how we can have greater oversight, civilian oversight as well on many of these matters, making sure that we have as much information that's shared. And aside from that, this is less under the purview of the task force, but one thing that my colleagues and I have been working on, and I know the mayor agrees with this well, is looking at ways that we reimagine public safety in our city, looking at the public health aspect as it relates to so many 911 calls that are having to do with someone who's in the throes of substance abuse or is dealing with some mental health issues, some dual diagnosis, which is often the case of both of those. So looking at ways that we can better work with our best team, with our health clinicians, with other individuals to both provide for public safety but really, hopefully, and eventually set the model of what an American city should be doing to reimagine what it means to have public safety and effective public safety.
Finally, one other area you've been looking into, this is now related to the pandemic, going back quite a while, you were trying to make sure people using the parks and maybe running and working up a sweat had a place to get some water. Now, these days, we also need a place to sanitize a bit. What's happening with that?
That's right. An early hearing order I did probably back in 2012, I believe, was on establishing water filling stations in our parks and playgrounds. We have some of the finest drinking water in the world, certainly in the country here in Boston. The original lens that I was sort of looking through this issue again nearly a decade ago was the environmental impact and just the scourge that the single-use water bottles can wreak in our environment, as well as the cost associated with it. A bottle of water costs about $2. It can be very cost prohibitive when we, again, have a thing for pennies that you would pay using, from your own tap. So I was looking at getting water filling stations in our parks and playgrounds because of our work now that every time a park goes through a renovation or a new park comes online, part of the original specs are having these water filling stations. But now looking at it through more of the public health lens, I'm looking at not only hydration stations, but also hygiene stations as well. Many other municipalities have looked at these temporary sinks to help individuals have an opportunity to wash their hands, to clean their hands. We know how effective washing one's hands can be to slowing the spread of of the coronavirus, of COVID-19. I think that we're at this point, 7 months in, we're all experts in washing our hands, singing happy birthday twice or another song. And I would rival our hand washing with a surgeon going in to perform his or her duties. So having more sinks available, more hand washing stations is not only going to help with hygiene, but also help with this real public health. We are seeing dangerous trends in rates. We're seeing Boston on the uptick. I think of unhoused individuals. I think those who are experiencing homelessness. I think of those who are out and about and may not have the same opportunity to wash their hands. Moreover, many of these businesses, many of these restaurants or stores where individuals might go in to use the restroom or to wash their hands have been closed. So simply setting up some of these temporary sinks along the common, along other high trafficked areas is going to pay huge dividends. The cost will be minimal, and it's something that we need to be doing now and we need to be continuing to do in the months ahead. And it's something I'd like to see as a real permanent solution, both for health, hygiene, and for hydration.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk about that.
Always great to be with you, Chris. Thanks so much.
Yep. Boston City Councilor from District 6, Matt O'Malley. We'll have more news in just a moment.